Okay, thanks. So yeah, my name is Sinead, and I'm just going to talk about some work we did predicting dog shape and pose from RGBD cameras. So our main contributions are, this is the first method to predict shape and pose of dogs from depth images. We do this through a combination of a stacked hourglass neural network, and then we refine the prediction using shape and pose priors. And as part of the paper then as well, we're releasing a data set, a multimodal, multi-view data set of dog motion with a ground truth skeleton and marker 3D information. So to start off on why we chose dogs, there was a few reasons. It's an interesting problem because there's such a wide range in shape and size within a single species. They're relatively easy to source though, and we can bring them into the motion capture studio, and they can be directed to a degree during recording in order to acquire various motions of the subjects. There's also some pre-existing RGB data sets of dogs, so we think this shows that there's an interest in the community in predicting this type of information about the animals. So I mentioned that our method is in two stages. Our first is a network prediction stage. First of all, we use real dog data to generate synthetic images, and we use these to train our network. The network is trained to produce 2D heat maps, and from these heat maps, we extract 3D joint information. I'll go into this in a bit more detail in a minute. And then the second stage is our refinement stage. We take these 3D joint locations and we calculate the bone lengths of the skeleton. We take these bone lengths and use a PCA shape model to generate the dog that best fits these bone lengths. So now we have the dog skeleton, and we use a pose model called a hierarchical Gaussian process latent variable model to pose a skeleton such that it best fits the 3D joint positions that the network predicted. The network we use is just a standard stacked hourglass network. We chose this because it has been used by many other authors, and it has been shown to give good results for humans. So we made the assumption then that it would also be applicable to dogs. The HGPLVM is a generative model. It can be used to represent multidimensional nonlinear data in lower dimensions. The hierarchical version of this model means that we can exploit this skeleton structure in the dog motion data. So basically, sorry, I'm getting this up. The model is trained using joint information, so we represent it as rotation and translation. We have to use translation in the model because unlike humans, dogs don't have clavicle bones, and this means that their shoulders can actually move in 3D space, so we need to represent translation in the model as well. Because our model represents the pose in rotation and translation, it means we can use skinning methods then to apply the model output to a mesh. So this is just a visual representation of the model. On the left, we are just moving one limb of the dog, so this corresponds to one node in the model. But on the right, we're moving about in the top node of the model, and it's generating an entire pose of the skeleton. So what this means is that our method, we can first estimate the global pose of the dog, and then go into each node in the model and separately refine each limb of the dog to best fit the network predicted joints. So we also use a shape model. This was created using a combination of photogrammetry scans of dogs and laser scans of toy dogs. The model represents dogs in bone lengths, in skeleton joint rotations, and the neutral mesh of the dog. We modeled the skeleton joint rotations because we feel that the neutral pose of a small squat dog is very different to that of a tall, thin dog. In order to make sure that our method works for real images, we want to be able to train it with realistic noisy synthetic images. To do this, we use the renderer from InteriorNet by Lee et al. So we show here on the top row, this is real images that we recorded of the dog from the Kinect. And on the bottom, we show the corresponding synthetic images that the renderer created. So in order to generate our heat maps, this is the method we're using. We're taking the skeleton in 3D space, and we're taking our camera parameters and we're projecting them into 2D space. So for this joint here, we have the information, we have X and Y image coordinates, but we also have the depth value of the joint. So we refer to this depth value as Z. We normalize the depth of each of the joints using a 2-meter cube located at the root of the dog. And then we represent these X, Y, and Z values in 3 2D heat maps, as shown. And we use this combination here on the right because we performed tests, and this was the combination that gave us the most accurate results. For real-world data, there's a few more options, a few more steps we need to do. We need to be able to locate the dog in the image and to create an accurate silhouette mask of the dog. For the moment, we were looking at pre-trained networks, but we ran into an issue where there's no pre-trained networks that can detect a dog in the image. We did find some RGB segmentation networks, and we looked in particular at Mask, RCNN, and Deep Lab, but neither of these were completely gave acceptable results. We found that the Mask RCNN was much more accurate at locating the dog in the image, but the mask that Deep Lab produced when it did detect a dog was much more accurate. So what we decided to do then was to combine the two masks, where first Mask RCNN is used to locate the dog in the image. We crop the image then to this general area of the image and give it into Deep Lab, and Deep Lab gives us then the final mask of the image. So this is an example of what I mentioned, where our original image here is on the left, and we give this to Mask RCNN, and it gives us the red mask of the dog. There's some areas around the legs that aren't quite close to the dogs that we'd like to be more accurate. So we've cropped the image then on the right, and we gave it to Deep Lab, and Deep Lab gives us this purple mask. And you can see particularly under the neck, it matches the legs much more closely than Mask RCNN. So now we have the mask as the RGB image, but we need to be able to apply it to the depth image. To do this, we apply the homography matrix between the two sensors in the camera, and we get the mask on the left. So given our raw input image in the center, we apply the mask to this. We crop and scale the image accordingly so that it will be appropriate for input to the network, and that gives us the image then on the right. This is some example of the final result produced by the pipeline. On the top row, we have the 2D image, the depth image, and we have the projected 3D skeleton shown in this. And on the bottom row, we're showing the 3D dog skeleton from 2 different viewpoints. And yeah, as I mentioned, because our model produces joint rotation and translation, we can also get the manipulated dog mesh as well as the skeleton joint locations. We wanted to be able to compare our method with another method, but we ran into an issue where no one else is predicting dog shape and pose from depth images. So instead, we compare it with the method by Biggs et al. This team, though, is predicting dog shape and pose from sequences of silhouette images. So we acknowledge that the comparison isn't exactly fair, but it still gives us some sort of baseline to work from. So our result here is shown on the right-hand side of the screen. We use two different metrics to calculate the accuracy of the pipeline. And we also calculated for various sections of the skeleton along with the entire skeleton itself. And as expected, because depth images contain more information than binary images, we did get more accurate results than Biggs et al. For the most part. Sometimes they got better results for the tail, but for the entire skeleton, ours tended to perform much better. We also show on the left the structure of the dog skeletons. So ours is the skeleton on the right-hand side, and we believe that this is much more representative of a biological skeleton of a dog. So we believe this has just advantages in itself, that it much more closely matches a real dog. Out of interest, we also tested the pipeline with images of animals that weren't dogs. We found that if the pose of the animal was quite close to that of what we had in the training set, then the network and the pipeline itself produced quite good results. The image on the right-hand side is the final skeleton and mesh produced by the pipeline. And the column next to this then is the meshes that were used to generate the synthetic images. And unfortunately, we don't have the ground truth skeleton for these meshes. They were just 3D point clouds. So we're only able to compare the results visually, but we do think that this is promising for future work. But unfortunately, even if we're testing the network on dogs, if the pose is very different to that, what we had in the training set, then the network is not really able to cope with giving it a sensible prediction. So for example, we didn't have any training data where the dog was sitting down or lying down. So this is the type of result the network will predict. But we believe that if our training set contains more varied motion, then these results will be improved in the future. So I also mentioned that we're releasing a data set along with our paper. This is multimodal, so we're giving RGB images, 4K and HD images, and also depth images from the Kinect. There were some issues recording from the Kinect, so it's only at 6 frames per second, but the 4K RGB video is at 60 frames per second, as is the skeleton information and marker information. So we're also giving the ground truth skeleton and mesh of the dogs as well. These are the dogs available in our data set. So on the left, we have 5 dogs. And for each of these 5 dogs, we have the five common motions. And we also have a random test sequence for each of these dogs. And on the right-hand side, we have 2 dogs that just have pure test sequences. And we chose these dogs because we felt that even for a small number of dogs, that they gave quite a large range in shape and size. And some more example images from the data set, we had to use various props in order to be able to record different motions from the dogs. So things such as a small table or jump poles. And on the bottom then is just an example of 5 frames apart of a dog jumping up onto a table. That's the sort of images that we were recording. And then these are the different modalities in the data set. So here we're showing the mask applied to the image, the projected skeleton, the projected markers from the motion capture suit, and the bounding box of the dog. The link here at the bottom is where you can access this data if you're interested. We also provide just some example code to help you make use of the data. So things like importing the animated skeleton and mesh into Blender. So we believe there's a lot of potential directions we can go with this work. One thing I mentioned was that we'd like to be able to have more variation in the poses in the training set, and this will help us to be able to fit to those images, such as the dog lying down or the lying down. At the moment, we're only solving frame by frame, so there's actually no temporal constraints in the pipeline. So we believe that incorporating this would give us much more accurate results. There's also some issues using the RGB mask and applying to the depth mask. We feel this isn't ideal, but it's something that we were doing for the time being. Our pose prior is currently in the form of HGPLVM, but we think that using a general adversarial network could give better results as well. And we'd also like to be able to record different species and test out the pipeline results on these. That's it.
Thank you for your talk, Sinead. So we have some questions, I guess. One of the questions that I have is about, so like dogs come in a huge variety of shapes and sizes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was interested to know about the construction of your PCA model. In particular, like some dogs almost have no tail at all, whereas other dogs have large tails. So how well do you feel that you've covered the range of dogs within your model?
So what we decided to do is keep the number of bones constant throughout all dogs. So for example, some dogs had a docked tail, but we still gave the dog the same amount of bones in the tail. We just made the bones very short. We just decided that was the best way to handle it, rather than to have different number of bones per dog.
Cool. And then I guess what are you what applications are you looking at for this work? Because I guess there's a huge amount of interest in animal welfare applications and things like that.
So I think things such as, CGI dogs in videos and games are kind of an obvious step. But also there's things like, there's papers I've seen where they're using motion capture to detect lameness in horses, or just to kind of study the gait of an animal over time. Maybe if a dog has a prosthetic limb, you could track how well it's recovering over time.
Oh, and I think we have a question on the YouTube. No, there's not. Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much for your talk, Sinead. And it's a fascinating piece of work. And good luck in the main track of CVPL.
Thanks.